We're told that life is random, a chaotic series of accidents. But what if it's not? What if there are patterns hidden in plain sight? Coincidences so mathematically impossible, they feel less like chance and more like a signature, evidence of a hidden script. Today, we're exploring 10 true stories that defy all logic, each one a chilling glitch in the Matrix that will make you question everything you think you know about reality. The glitch in the skyline. You'd have to be deep into conspiracy theories to believe a video game could predict the future, right? It's just code and pixels, a fantasy built for our entertainment. But what if a game's creators accidentally wrote a prophecy, not with magic, but because they were simply trying to save on memory? The game was Deus Ex, a cyberpunk masterpiece from the year 2000, celebrated for its intricate plot and a meticulously crafted dystopian world. Players could explore dark, futuristic cityscapes, including a stunningly detailed recreation of New York City, set against the backdrop of a global conspiracy. You could visit Battery Park and a damaged Statue of Liberty, navigating a world that felt both fantastical and eerily plausible. But as players explored this digital Manhattan, they noticed something profoundly wrong. A massive, gaping hole existed in the most iconic skyline on the planet. The two colossal pillars of the World Trade Center, the twin titans of commerce that had dominated the city for nearly 30 years, were simply gone. In a game praised for its obsessive detail, it seemed like an impossible oversight. A glaring mistake. The truth, however, was far stranger. The development team at Ion Storm had a purely technical problem. The game's engine was already straining under the graphical load of the New York City map. The memory budget was maxed out. Rendering the two gigantic towers was computationally impossible. The game would crash. So, they were deleted. But the artists couldn't just leave a void. They needed a story, an in-world justification for the missing landmarks. So they wrote a single line of lore, a piece of background information buried in the game's fiction to explain the empty sky. The towers had been destroyed in a terrorist attack. For a little over a year, this was just a clever piece of science fiction world building, a narrative patch for a hardware limitation. Then came the morning of September 11th, 2001. The fiction, born from convenience, became a global headline. The reason the developers invented to explain the missing towers became the exact reason they disappeared in real life. It was a fictional history created for technical convenience that became a terrifyingly real headline. It forces you to ask, if a simple glitch in a digital world can accidentally mirror our future with such precision, are we sure the reality we live in isn't running on a similar predictable code? The bullet that waited 20 years. But if a digital prophecy feels unsettling, our next story shows that reality itself can write a script that's even more patient. The idea of karma, that the universe delivers perfect justice with calculating precision, sounds like a fairy tale. A bullet doesn't have a memory. It doesn't wait for revenge. Or does it? The story begins in 1893 with a farmer in Honey Grove, Texas, named Henry Ziegland, and a broken promise of marriage. When Ziegland ended his courtship, his spurned sweetheart was so consumed by grief that she took her own life. Her distraught brother, overwhelmed by rage, swore he would not let the injustice stand. He stormed over to Ziegland's property, found him standing in his yard, took aim with his pistol, and fired. Ziegland collapsed to the ground. Believing his sister's honor had been avenged, the brother then turned the gun on himself, ending his own life in a final tragic act. But Ziegland wasn't dead. In a stunning twist of fate, the bullet had only grazed the side of his head, its impact knocking him unconscious. It continued its high-speed journey and slammed deep into the trunk of a large tree standing directly behind him. Ziegland counted himself the luckiest man alive, narrowly escaping a fate that had already been paid for by another. Life moved on. The bullet became a forgotten secret, a lead pellet encased in a tomb of wood. The tree grew, its bark slowly healing over the hole, hiding the evidence of that violent day. 20 years passed. In 1913, an older Henry Ziegland was clearing his land. The very same tree that had once saved his life was now an immovable obstacle. It was a massive, stubborn giant, too thick to be chopped down with an axe. Frustrated, Ziegland decided on an explosive solution: dynamite. He drilled several holes into the trunk, packed them with explosives, and lit the fuse, stepping back to watch the troublesome tree be blasted into oblivion. The explosion was immense, a deafening roar that ripped the trunk into 1,000 splinters, but it did more than just destroy the tree. The blast acted like the firing of a cannon, and the projectile it launched was the bullet that had been resting inside for 2 decades. It shot out of the chaos with incredible velocity, flying across the very same yard where it was first fired. It struck Henry Ziegler directly in the head, killing him instantly. It was a single bullet, fired from 2 different sources 20 years apart, that finally found its mark. It raises an uncomfortable question. If a simple object can carry out a mission with such impossible patience, who's to say the forces governing our own lives aren't just as determined and just as inescapable? The fortune cookie prophecy. A patient bullet is one thing, but what about a prophecy for the masses? Let's be honest, you'd have to be a fool to play the lottery numbers from a fortune cookie. It's the definition of random, meaningless nonsense printed on millions of slips of paper. Or is it? On March 30th, 5,000 of those identical paper slips held a sequence that was a key, about to unlock a statistical miracle and trigger a nationwide investigation. The event was the Powerball Lottery, a multi-state game famous for its colossal jackpots. That night, lottery officials began reviewing the results and noticed something was terribly wrong. The second-place prize, for matching 5 of the 6 winning numbers, typically goes to a handful of people at most. The prize for each winner on this draw was over $100,000. But as the state-by-state reports flooded in, the numbers were not just unusual, they were impossible. It wasn't 4 or 5 winners. It was 110 people, scattered across 29 different states. The immediate conclusion from the Multi-State Lottery Association was fraud. It had to be a coordinated scam, a vast conspiracy, or a sophisticated computer hack. An urgent investigation was launched, with officials bracing to uncover a criminal enterprise. They began contacting the winners, expecting to find a network, a common link that would expose the scheme. But they found the opposite. The winners were complete strangers to each other. They were doctors, truckers, teachers, and retirees. There was absolutely no connection. As investigators pressed on, bewildered, they finally stumbled upon the single, absurd thread that tied all 110 winners together. They all kept telling the same story. They got the numbers from a fortune cookie after eating at a Chinese restaurant. The trail eventually led to a massive factory in Long Island City, New York, owned by Wonton Food Incorporated, one of the largest fortune cookie producers in the United States. They discovered that the company had printed thousands of fortunes with the same set of lucky numbers on the back: 22, 28, 32, 33, 39, and 40. The actual winning Powerball numbers drawn that night were 22, 28, 32, 33, 39, and a Powerball of 42. The cookie had perfectly predicted 5 of the 6 numbers. A single factory's random choice engineered a life-changing payday for 110 strangers. It was dismissed as a fluke, but it makes you wonder, how many other mass-produced prophecies are out there just waiting for the right moment to come true? The Ferrari Ozil doppelganger cycle. But if a prophecy can be printed on paper, perhaps a life itself can be a reprint. The internet loves a good celebrity lookalike, and we dismiss it as a simple genetic fluke. But what if the resemblance is so perfect and the timing so precise? It suggests not a fluke, but a deliberate cycle. On one side, you have Enzo Ferrari, the legendary founder of the Ferrari empire. He was a titan of industry whose face became synonymous with Italian speed and luxury, a patriarch whose legacy is written in chrome and horsepower. On the other side, you have Mesut Ozil, the German soccer phenom, a midfield maestro celebrated for his creative genius and his distinctively wide-eyed, intense gaze. When you place pictures of the two men side by side, the similarity is breathtaking. It's not just a passing resemblance found at a certain angle. It's the structure of the nose, the shape of the eyes, the set of the mouth. For years, this was just a striking piece of internet trivia, 2 famous men from different eras and different worlds who happen to look like identical twins. But the real story, the detail that elevates this from a simple coincidence to something that feels profoundly engineered, isn't in their faces, it's in the calendar. On August 14, 1988, the great Enzo Ferrari passed away at the age of 90, marking the end of an era. The world of motorsport mourned the loss of one of its founding fathers. Then, just 57 days later, a mere 2 months after Ferrari's death, Mesut Özil was born on October 15, 1988. The proximity is what makes this so chilling. It's a nearly seamless transition. One life, a giant in his field, concludes. A new life, destined to become a giant in his own, begins, carrying what appears to be the very same face. Skeptics will call it a 1 in a billion coincidence. But the pattern is so perfect it has fueled endless theories of reincarnation. It leaves you with an uncomfortable question. Are we all unique, or are some life blueprints simply too good for the universe to use only once? The two Dennis the Menaces. If a human life can seemingly be duplicated, what about a simple idea? We assume a creative spark is unique. The odds of two different artists, on opposite sides of the Atlantic, independently creating a comic strip character with the exact same name should be zero. And yet, in a perfect case of creative telepathy, it happened on the exact same day. The first thread of this story begins in the United States. In October of 1950, cartoonist Hank Ketchum was in his studio, struggling for a new idea, when his wife stormed in. She was furious with their 4-year-old son, Dennis, who had managed to systematically destroy his bedroom in the span of a nap. In a moment of pure exasperation, she threw her hands up and said, "Your son is a menace!" A light bulb went off. Ketchum immediately grabbed his pencil and sketched a single-panel cartoon featuring a small, chaotic boy with a distinctive cowlick and overalls. He had his character, and he had his name, Dennis the Menace. The second thread begins entirely separately, 3,000 miles away in the United Kingdom. An editor for the popular comic, The Beano, was listening to a music hall song that contained the lyric, "I'm Dennis the Menace from Venice." The name stuck with him. He passed the idea along to one of his artists, David Law, with a simple instruction: create a comic strip about a truly naughty, menacing boy. Law developed a character who was the polar opposite of Ketchum's creation, a scowling, spiky-haired bully in a red and black striped jumper who delighted in causing genuine trouble, often accompanied by his equally menacing dog, Gnasher. The two artists, Ketchum and Law, worked in complete isolation from one another. There was no internet, no easy global communication. They had no knowledge of each other's existence or projects. Yet, somehow, the cosmic wires crossed with impossible precision. Hank Ketchum's Dennis the Menace, the well-meaning American kid, debuted in 16 newspapers across the United States on March 12, 1951. On that exact same day, David Law's Dennis the Menace, the genuinely malicious British troublemaker, debuted in issue 452 of The Beano. The same name, the same medium, the same launch date. The two characters were so different in tone and design that it was clearly not a case of plagiarism, which only makes the coincidence more profound. It was an example of parallel thinking so perfect it feels engineered. It forces us to ask, are our best ideas truly our own, or are we all just tuning into the same creative frequency, receiving broadcasts from an unknown source? The curse of little bastard. If an idea can be broadcast, perhaps a curse can be imbued. We tell ourselves that objects are just objects, lifeless collections of atoms. But what if a machine could absorb the tragedy of its owner and become something malevolent, a vessel for a targeted, intelligent curse? The story begins on September 30th, 1955. Actor James Dean, the iconic rebel of Hollywood, was killed instantly when his new Porsche 550 Spider collided with another car. The Spider, a silver bullet he lovingly called Little Bastard, was a mangled wreck, but its journey was far from over. Famed car customizer George Barris bought the totaled vehicle for $2,500, planning to strip it and sell the valuable parts. The curse began almost immediately. As the car was being delivered to his garage, it slipped from its chains, fell, and crushed both legs of a mechanic who was standing nearby. Undeterred, Barris sold the Porsche's powerful engine to a doctor named Troy McHenry, and its drivetrain to another amateur racer, William Eschrich. In a twisted turn of fate, the two men decided to compete in the same race. During the event, McHenry lost control of his car, swerved off the track, and was killed instantly when he hit a tree. In that very same race, Eschrich's car suddenly locked up, causing it to roll over and leaving him seriously injured. The curse continued to spread. Barris sold 2 of the Porsche's tires, which had survived the crash, to another young man. Just a few days later, both tires blew out at the exact same time, sending his car careening off the road. The car's shell was later loaned out for a traveling exhibit on driving safety. But even as a stationary display, its malice seemed active. A thief tried to steal the steering wheel and his arm was torn open on a shard of metal. Another tried to take the blood-stained seat and was also mysteriously injured. The final chapter came in 1960. The wreckage was being transported in a sealed truck from Miami to Los Angeles. When the truck arrived, the driver opened the locked container to find it empty. The 1,100-pound car had vanished without a trace. It was too long and too specific to be a mere string of bad luck. The uncomfortable question remains: if a machine can be programmed with a curse that systematically destroys anyone who touches it, what other objects in our lives are running a code we can't see? The Civil War's perfect bookend. But if a curse can be engineered into an object, our next story suggests that destiny can be engineered into a person's life from start to finish. We think of history as a chaotic, messy affair, but for the American Civil War, the first major battle and the final surrender were linked by one man, providing the nation's bloodiest conflict with a bookend so perfect it feels scripted. That man was Wilmer McLean. He was not a soldier or a politician. He was a 47-year-old wholesale grocer who had the profound misfortune of living in a very convenient location. His home near Manassas, Virginia, was situated right next to a railroad junction and a stream known as Bull Run. In July of 1861, McLean's house was commandeered by the Confederacy to serve as a headquarters. On July 21st, the war exploded into life all around him. The First Battle of Bull Run raged across his property, and at one point, a Union cannonball came crashing through his summer kitchen, landing in the fireplace. The war had literally landed in his dining room. With his business ruined and his family terrified, McLean made a solemn vow he would move. He was determined to find a place so quiet, so obscure, and so strategically insignificant that the war could never possibly find him again. He moved his family 120 miles south to the tiny, sleepy village of Appomattox Courthouse. For nearly 4 years, it seemed his plan had worked. History had forgotten him, but history has a long memory. In April of 1865, the war was in its final days. A retreating General Robert E. Lee found his Confederate army cornered by Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant, right on the outskirts of Appomattox Courthouse. Lee knew it was over and sent an aide into the village to find a suitable private home to conduct the formal surrender. The aide knocked on the door of the first respectable-looking brick house he came across. The man who answered was a stunned Wilmer McLean. A few hours later, McLean's front parlor became the most famous room in America as Lee signed the surrender documents, effectively ending the Civil War. He was a man who fled from history only to have it hunt him down to write its final chapter. McLean's story leaves us with a chilling question. How much free will do we really have if destiny can write a script so perfect it begins and ends on the same person's doorstep? The woman who was her own twin. If a man's destiny can be written in the stars, perhaps a person's very identity is written in code, a code that can be far more complex than we know. A mother's DNA is supposed to be the ultimate biological truth, an unbreakable signature. We dismiss any contradiction as impossible, but what happens when that impossible contradiction is true, revealing a biological reality so strange it feels like a secret piece of human engineering? In 2002, Lydia Fairchild, a mother of 2 and pregnant with her 3rd, applied for state financial assistance. The process was standard procedure, requiring a mandatory deoxyribonucleic acid test to prove the family relationship. The results for the children's father came back as a perfect match. But when Lydia's results arrived, they were not just wrong, they were impossible. The test concluded with 0% probability that she was the mother of her own children. The system immediately flagged her as a fraud. Prosecutors began building a case, accusing her of an elaborate welfare scam. She was facing criminal charges and the very real threat of having her children taken away by the state. Lydia was trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare. She had birth certificates, hospital records, and photos of herself pregnant. Her own mother had witnessed the births, yet none of that mattered against the cold, hard certainty of the genetic test. When her third child was born, the judge ordered a court officer to be in the delivery room to witness the birth and oversee the immediate collection of deoxyribonucleic acid samples. A few weeks later, those results came back with the same conclusion. Lydia Fairchild was not the mother. Her case seemed hopeless until her lawyer stumbled upon an article in the New England Journal of Medicine about a similar case. The article introduced him to an incredibly rare biological condition, human chimerism. Named after the monster from Greek myth, a chimera is a single organism that contains two complete sets of deoxyribonucleic acid. It happens in the womb, when one fraternal twin embryo is absorbed by the other. The result is a perfectly healthy person who is, quite literally, two people fused into one. The theory was that the deoxyribonucleic acid in Lydia's blood and skin belonged to her, while the deoxyribonucleic acid in her reproductive organs belonged to her vanished twin. After further, more invasive testing, they proved it. She was her own twin, and her twin was the mother of her children. Lydia's case proved her innocence. But it opens a terrifying question. If you can be two people at once without even knowing it, how certain can any of us be about who or what we truly are? The double drowning of a king. But what if a person's internal code is perfectly aligned with their external fate? We call it irony when a person's obsession leads to their doom, dismissing it as a literary trope. But for King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the line between his life's passion and his death was so blurred, it suggests his end was not an accident, but the final, scheduled act of a Gothic opera. Ludwig was not a king of politics and war. He was a dreamer. Known as the Swan King, he was captivated by the romantic myths of ancient Germany. He poured the Bavarian treasury into constructing some of the most breathtaking castles in the world. His most famous, Neuschwanstein, sits perched on a rocky crag like something from a fairy tale. Another of his palaces was built on an island in the middle of a massive lake. Water was his muse, the central element in his architectural and personal world. But while Ludwig was building his dream world, the real world grew tired of him. His ministers, frustrated with his reclusive behavior and extravagant spending, conspired to have him removed. They enlisted the help of a highly respected psychiatrist, Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, who, after a cursory assessment, officially declared the king paranoid and mentally unfit to rule. On June 12, 1886, Ludwig was deposed and taken into custody. He was imprisoned in Berg Castle, a modest manor whose grounds ran right up to the shore of Lake Starnberg. His warden, tasked with overseeing his every move, was Dr. von Gudden himself. The very next evening, on the stormy night of June 13th, Ludwig asked to take a walk along the lakeshore with the doctor. The request was granted, and the two men set off alone. They never returned. Hours later, a search party discovered a horrifying scene. The bodies of both King Ludwig and Dr. von Gudden were found floating in the shallow, hip-deep water. There were footprints suggesting a chase, signs of a violent struggle, and Gudden's body showed evidence of strangulation. Yet, the official cause of the king's death was ruled a suicide by drowning. The coincidence that elevates this from a simple mystery to an engineered tragedy is this. The doctor who had him committed, and who died beside him, wasn't just any psychiatrist. Dr. von Gudden's specific area of expertise, the subject of his own doctoral thesis, was suicide by drowning. It's an irony so perfect it's chilling. A water-obsessed king, certified as suicidal by an expert in water-related suicides, who then dies in the water, taking that very expert with him. It makes you ask, are our lives our own? Or are we all just characters in a story, playing out a destiny that's already been written for us? The Bermuda Taxi Tragedy. If one life can be scripted, what about two? We have a saying we use to comfort ourselves: lightning never strikes the same place twice. It's a belief that tragedy is a random, one-time event. But a story from the island of Bermuda defies that logic so completely, it suggests some events are not accidents at all, but appointments. In July of 1974, a 17-year-old man named Neville Ebbin was riding his moped down a quiet road in Hamilton Parish. In a sudden, violent moment, he was struck by a taxi and killed. It was a devastating and senseless accident, the kind that unfortunately happens all over the world. A family was left to mourn, and the island community was left to shake its head at the tragedy of a young life cut short. Almost exactly 1 year later, in July of 1975, an almost identical tragedy occurred. Neville's younger brother, Erskine Lawrence Ebbin, also 17 years old, was riding a moped down the very same road. In a horrifying echo of the previous year, he too was struck by a taxi and killed instantly. The news was shocking. Two brothers, both killed at the same age, in the same manner, on the same road. The community was stunned by the awful symmetry of it all. But when police began to investigate, the coincidence spiraled into something far more chilling, a pattern so precise it feels supernatural. The details that emerged from the police report are what make this story a statistical impossibility. Erskine wasn't just riding a similar moped, he was riding the exact same moped his brother Neville had been killed on 1 year prior. The taxi that struck and killed Erskine was the exact same taxi that had killed Neville. It was being operated by the exact same driver. And as a final, impossible detail, sitting in the back seat of the taxi at the moment of impact was the very same passenger the driver had been carrying during the fatal accident a year before. Every single variable was perfectly replicated to produce the exact same tragic result. It's a coincidence so mathematically improbable and so brutally precise that it defies all logic. It wasn't an accident that happened twice. It was a single fatal appointment scheduled 1 year apart. It leaves us with the most uncomfortable question of all. If our tragedies can be scheduled with such terrifying precision, what does that imply about the architect scheduling them? 10 stories, 10 moments where the veil of chaos was pulled back to reveal a glimpse of a terrifying, intricate pattern. From a taxi that arrived twice for two brothers, to a war that began and ended in the same man's home. Are these just meaningless flukes in an infinite universe? Or are we seeing the faint outlines of a hidden script, a set of rules we don't yet understand? Perhaps the ultimate question isn't whether our reality is engineered, but who or what is the engineer? If these stories made you question reality, hit the like button and subscribe for more dives into the unexplained. We want to hear your own glitch in the Matrix story, so share it with us in the comments below. Perhaps your experience will be number 11 on a future list.